The camera drifts slowly through the vast, unbroken silence of space, passing through the endless sea of stars, each one flickering like a faraway diamond. The infinite cosmos stretches out, cold and indifferent, until a massive structure emerges from the void. A colossal space station, an ancient monument to civilization itself. This is the Galactic Council's chamber, a citadel of power and prestige. Its architecture so grand and so intricate that it feels as though the very fabric of the universe itself has bent to accommodate it. Towering crystalline pillars rise to heights that stretch beyond imagination, their surfaces etched with glowing symbols, each one pulsating faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. The chamber is a place where time itself seems to stand still, heavy with millennia of knowledge and authority. As we move closer, the station's vastness becomes even more apparent. Within its sprawling expanse, representatives from countless alien species are gathered. The air is thick with the weight of their collective power, their silent eyes scanning the room as if measuring the worth of each new arrival. At the center of this gathering, upon a raised crystalline podium, stands the High Commissioner, Draken Velour. He is a being unlike any other, a bioluminescent creature, his body adorned with iridescent scales that shimmer and shift with each subtle movement. His presence is mesmerizing, yet imposing, and his gaze cuts through the room like a blade. He watches the human delegates below, his sharp, calculating eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. The humans, clad in bulky, primitive environmental suits, look laughably small beneath the towering Valorian architecture. Their suits hiss and wheeze with every breath, a constant reminder of their biological inferiority. Velour's scales flicker in a dance of light as he looks down at them, the glow pulsing softly in time with his thoughts, almost as if he were savoring the moment. With a voice that booms across the chamber, rich and full of ancient power, Draken Velour addresses them. The words come slowly, deliberately, each syllable dripping with disdain and amusement. What makes you think, humans, that your species deserves a seat among us? You barely survive in our atmosphere. You are but children, playing in the stars. The chamber resonates with the sound of laughter, deep and mocking, as the Valorian dignitaries around him join in unison. Their neck frills flare wide in exaggerated displays of superiority, pulsing in rhythm with their amusement. Their bioluminescent markings shift in waves of glowing light, sending ripples of color across their robes and bodies. The laughter echoes off the walls of the chamber, reverberating in the stillness of the vast hall. Standing tall before the Valorians, Ambassador Roland Martinez and his colleague Lisa Chen maintain their composure, though their frustration is palpable. Roland stands firm, despite the weight of the mocking laughter, his mechanical suit creaking with every adjustment. The servos inside his suit whine in protest, but he remains steadfast. His gaze is unyielding as he addresses the High Commissioner, his voice calm but resolute. With all due respect, High Commissioner, humanity has achieved faster-than-light travel in less than 3 centuries. Our rate of technological advancement outpaces even the most advanced civilizations. Surely that speaks for itself. For a moment, the room falls silent. Roland's words cut through the laughter, hanging in the air like a challenge. The Valorians exchange glances, their laughter faltering for a brief instant as they process the audacity of the human delegate's defiance. But Draken Velour, ever the picture of control, remains unmoved. His eyes narrow slightly, his scales shifting in a pattern of subtle displeasure. His voice, when it comes again, is slow and deliberate, dripping with a venomous amusement that lingers in the air. Your advancements are nothing more than a fleeting attempt to catch up. The Valorian dominion has guided galactic civilization for 50,000 years. We perfected quantum mechanics while your ancestors were still fighting with spears. Your success, if you can even call it that, has come too quickly, too recklessly. You have yet to understand the true cost of such power. The laughter returns, louder now, shaking the very walls of the chamber. The Valorians revel in their superiority, their voices ringing in unison, a chorus of mocking triumph. But Roland and Lisa remain silent, resolute, their faces betraying no sign of fear, even as the Valorians flaunt their dominance. They have heard this before. They are no strangers to condescension. But beneath their calm exteriors, there is a fire, a quiet but burning desire to prove themselves. As the mockery dies down, Lisa Chen, standing beside Roland, steps forward. Her fingers tighten around the edge of the podium as she prepares to speak. Beneath her helmet, her jaw is clenched, and her voice, when it comes, is steady but filled with an undeniable strength. Perhaps you forget, High Commissioner, that humanity has already contributed greatly to biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and a myriad of other technologies that have revolutionized the galactic community. We may be young, but we are not primitive. We are no longer the children you think us to be. Her words, though calm, carry the weight of a challenge, one that the Valorians cannot ignore. The chamber falls into an almost eerie silence, the air thick with tension as the Valorian dignitaries shift uncomfortably in their seats. The High Commissioner remains unmoved, but there is a flicker of something in his eyes. A shift, barely perceptible, yet significant. He raises his hand, the motion slow, deliberate. The room falls completely silent as he speaks again, his voice carrying an icy authority that sends shivers through the chamber. Your petition will be reconsidered, in time. But for now, you will remain a protectorate species under the careful guidance of the Valorian Dominion. Perhaps in a few thousand years, we may see fit to grant your species a true seat at the table. The words hang heavy in the air, their finality unmistakable. As the human delegation turns to leave, escorted by towering Valorian guards, the tension in the room remains thick. Velour watches them go, a small, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He has dismissed them, their attempts to challenge his authority crushed beneath the weight of centuries of power. But what he does not know, what none of them could foresee, is that this encounter, this moment of scorn, would soon set in motion a discovery that would shatter their carefully constructed superiority. Draken Velour raised his hand in a slow, sweeping gesture, dismissing the human delegates with a motion that was both grand and effortless. As his hand moved through the air, ripples of light cascaded through his ceremonial robes, their intricate fabric shimmering in waves of ethereal glow, distorting the space around him in a mesmerizing dance. The very atmosphere seemed to bend with his motion, as if the room itself responded to his command. Each ripple of light was a visual manifestation of the power that radiated from him, a constant reminder of the Valorian supremacy, as though reality itself bent to their will. The laughter of the Valorian dignitaries filled the chamber again, their voices rising in a unified, mocking chorus, echoing through the vast space like the rumble of distant thunder. Their neck frills flared wide, pulsing with arrogance, and the glow of their bioluminescent markings flickered and surged in synchronized waves. It was a display of superiority, their luminous bodies casting an almost hypnotic radiance as they reveled in the humans' apparent helplessness. The humans, dwarfed by the grandeur of the room and the overwhelming presence of their alien counterparts, stood silent and unmoving, their environmental suits hissing with each breath, their movements awkward and stiff. Yet, within that silence, a quiet tension began to simmer. Ambassador Lisa Chen, though outwardly calm, could feel the sting of the Valorian laughter biting into her resolve. Her fingers tightened around the podium, her knuckles white beneath the gloves of her suit. But she did not flinch. She stood tall, facing the High Commissioner with a steady gaze, her voice calm, but unmistakably filled with a defiance that pierced the heavy air. "Perhaps you forget, High Commissioner," she said, her words a measured challenge, "that humanity has already contributed greatly to biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and other technologies that have revolutionized not only our species, but the galaxy itself. We are not primitive. We are not inferior." The words hung in the air like a carefully sharpened blade. They were simple, but each syllable was laden with the weight of a truth the Valorians could no longer ignore. The room fell into a momentary silence as the Valorian dignitaries, for the first time, hesitated. The mocking laughter died down, replaced by a growing murmur of disbelief. But Draken Valor, seated on his crystalline throne, remained unmoved, his gaze fixed upon the human delegation. His eyes narrowed slightly, the shimmering patterns on his scales shifting in response. But there was no sign of fear, only cold calculation. He had seen countless species rise and fall, but humanity's audacity was something new, something worthy of note. With a barely perceptible shift, Draken Valor's voice broke through the stillness, low and heavy, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the chamber. "Your advancements are nothing but desperate attempts to catch up," he intoned, the words dripping with scorn. "The Valorian Dominion has guided galactic civilization for 50,000 years. We perfected quantum mechanics while your ancestors were still using spears. What could your species possibly offer us?" The words were slow, deliberate, each one reinforcing the chasm between the Valorians and humanity. The room erupted in laughter once again, this time louder, more triumphant. The Valorians could not help but revel in their superiority, their voices rising in a cacophony of mockery. The very air seemed to pulse with the arrogance of centuries of unchallenged dominance, as though their laughter could fill the entire universe, drowning out any possibility of human triumph. Their glowing bodies, rippling with light, created an almost hypnotic effect, as if the Valorian elite were untouchable, infallible. Yet, in the midst of it all, Lisa Chen stood unmoved. Her eyes, though hidden beneath her helmet, betrayed none of the fear or uncertainty the Valorians believed they had instilled in her. Her fingers slowly unclenched from the podium as her voice rose once more, steady and unwavering. She did not flinch under the barrage of their mockery. "You may have perfected quantum mechanics, High Commissioner," she said, her voice cutting through the laughter with surgical precision. "But you've forgotten what it means to truly evolve. Humanity's strength lies not in our mastery of the stars, but in our relentless pursuit of knowledge and progress. We have only just begun, and when the time comes, you will see that we are far from the primitives you believe us to be." Her words hung in the air like the stillness before a storm. The Valorian dignitaries, who had once mocked them, now shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the implications of what Lisa had said. For the first time, the laughter faltered, replaced by an uneasy silence. But Draken Valor remained impervious. His scales shifted slightly, glowing more intensely as he regarded the human delegation with a measured, cold gaze. There was no trace of doubt in his posture, no hint of insecurity. His power was as absolute as it had ever been. He had dismissed them once before, and he would do so again. His voice, when it came, was a quiet rumble, filled with an authority that could not be challenged. "Your petition will be reconsidered in time," he said, the words weighing heavily on the room. "But for now, you will remain a protectorate species, Your place is beneath us. Perhaps in a few thousand years, we may see fit to grant your species a true seat at the table." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. The Valorian laughter began to fade, but the sense of superiority lingered, hanging in the air like an oppressive cloud. The human delegation, though visibly tense, remained silent. The dismissive wave of Draken Velour's hand was the signal for them to leave, to retreat into their environmental suits and leave the room as lesser beings. As they were escorted from the chamber by towering Valorian guards, the heavy silence that had followed the exchange seemed to suffocate them. Yet, beneath the weight of Valorian dismissal, there was a subtle shift, an undeniable undercurrent of defiance that pulsed in the human's veins. What Velour and his council did not know, what none of them could foresee, was that this dismissal would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter the very foundation of Valorian power. The humans were not finished. They were far from it. The air on Proxima Centauri b hung thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional whistle of distant winds that seemed to dance through the jagged landscape. The sky above was a haunting shade of purple, clouds swirling lazily in patterns that made the whole world feel like it was caught in some kind of dream. Maya Blackwood stood before an ancient Valorian temple, the stone towering above her, covered in intricate markings that pulsed with a subtle energy. The walls were smooth, yet etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer in the weak light from their suits. There was something unsettlingly beautiful about this place, like an artifact that had been preserved by time itself, waiting to reveal its secrets to anyone bold enough to listen. Maya's fingers brushed against the cool stone, the etched markings beneath her touch, seeming to respond to her presence. Her eyes were locked on the symbols, scanning them with her handheld device, each scan producing results she couldn't quite understand. This wasn't like anything she had seen before in Valorian script. There was something deeper, something more ancient about it. Her heart pounded as she focused harder on the flowing shapes, her mind racing through all she had studied. The air was thick with mystery as her scanner hummed softly, analyzing the symbols, its data spilling across the small screen. Something was wrong. The symbols, though beautiful and intricate, didn't match any known Valorian language. The lines were smoother, the curves more organic. There was a sense of familiarity about them, a connection that tickled at the back of Maya's mind. As she continued to scan, her hand trembling slightly, she whispered to herself, "This doesn't match any known Valorian script. It's familiar." The words were barely audible over the hum of her device, but they held a weight that sent a shiver down her spine. She was on the edge of something incredible, something beyond the Valorians, beyond the confines of what they knew. The markings weren't alien at all. They were something else, something she recognized. Maya's heart skipped a beat as the data on her device continued to process. Nathan Rodriguez's voice crackled through the communicator in her ear, his voice a mix of confusion and excitement. "Maya, this is strange. The patterns, they match 67% with... Wait, no, this can't be right." Maya's fingers flew over the device as she adjusted the settings, her breath shallow, her pulse quickening. The symbols were undeniable now. Her mind raced as the calculations ran across her screen, revealing the truth she had feared and hoped was coming. The patterns were close, so close to something she knew, something deep in the history of humankind. Sanskrit. It was Sanskrit. This is a connection," Maya whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She felt a strange surge of excitement and trepidation. The Valorians had always claimed their language was unique, untouched by any other species. But now, here in this alien temple, there it was, a missing link. The Valorians hadn't evolved in isolation after all. This script, it was a bridge between them and humanity. And that meant everything was about to change. Before she could delve further into her discovery, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from behind. Sentinel Kraz, a towering Valorian guard, loomed in the entrance of the temple, his glowing eyes fixed on her with unmistakable menace. His voice broke through the quiet of the ancient chamber, thick with disdain. "This area is restricted. Pack up now, or face consequences." His tone was cold, threatening, and the air between them seemed to thicken, the temple's energy shifting as if it too recognized the danger. Maya's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers hovered over her device, transferring the data to a backup drive, her eyes flicking between Kraz and the symbols on the wall. She knew this was too important to lose, but the Valorians weren't known for their patience or their mercy. With a steady hand, she finished encrypting the data and sent a final, urgent transmission to Nathan. She knew the risks, but the discovery she had made was too powerful, too vital for them to ignore. As the guards advanced, Maya felt a tightness in her chest, a mixture of frustration and urgency. She was being forced to leave the temple, to abandon her findings in the hands of the Valorians, who wouldn't understand their true significance. She turned, her suit's servo motors whirring softly as she complied with the guard's demands, her gaze lingering for just a moment longer on the ancient symbols. The moment felt like a weight, pressing down on her as if time itself was holding its breath. They were escorted off the planet, but despite the dangerous atmosphere, Maya couldn't shake the sense of triumph that surged within her. She had found the link, and she knew now that the Valorians were hiding something that could change everything. The quiet urgency in her chest burned as they were led away, her heart set on the task ahead. The discovery had been made, and nothing could take it back. In the dimly lit room of their base, the air felt thick with the weight of discovery, the quiet hum of machines blending with the rush of Maya Blackwood's focused breath. Her hands moved rapidly across the holographic interface, eyes scanning the data streaming in front of her. Ancient Valorian texts, encrypted and fragmented, flashed on the screen, their meanings just beyond reach. Maya's fingers hovered over the symbols, her heart quickening as she deciphered the intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. The room was filled with the soft, rhythmic pulse of quantum displays, casting shadows on the walls. But it was the data before her that demanded every bit of her attention. Nathan Rodriguez's voice crackled through her communicator, the sound faint but growing sharper as he worked through the linguistic archives. "Maya, this is strange," his voice, filled with growing disbelief, echoed in her ear. "The patterns, they match 67% with... Wait, no, this can't be right." Her pulse raced as she adjusted the settings on her terminal, trying to make sense of what was unfolding. The symbols on the screen seemed to shift and align before her eyes, their meaning becoming clearer with every passing second. Her fingers trembled slightly as the realization settled over her. She leaned in closer, her breath catching in her throat as the data on her screen seemed to click into place. Maya whispered to herself, her voice thick with awe and confusion. "These symbols, they're not just Valorian or human. They are the same." Her heart skipped a beat as the pieces of the puzzle connected. This wasn't just a discovery of Valorian origin. This was something far deeper, something that linked their past with humanity's history in ways no one could have ever imagined. Her hands worked quickly now, typing commands into the interface, drawing together evidence that was both overwhelming and undeniable. The symbols, the sacred geometry, the structure of the language, all of it pointed to a singular truth. Humanity and the Valorians shared a common origin. Maya's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence in the room, but its weight was enough to fill the entire space. "Nathan, this is it. This is the proof we've been looking for." Her eyes never left the screen, the data unfolding before her like a story that had been waiting to be told for millennia. It was the final piece of a puzzle that had been obscured by time, by lies, by the arrogance of those who believed themselves to be the architects of history. She spoke again, more urgently now, her words sharp and clear. "I need a secure line to Ambassador Chen. What we found, it changes everything." As she spoke, the reality of what they had uncovered settled in. The Valorians, for all their technological power, their advanced civilizations, had been hiding the truth about their shared history with humankind. It was a truth that, once revealed, could fracture the foundation of galactic power. Maya knew that once the message was sent, there would be no turning back. The ancient script was not just a language. It was a key, one that unlocked the door to a hidden legacy, one that would force the galaxy to confront the lies it had been built on. As the connection to Ambassador Chen was established, Maya's heart pounded, not just from the urgency of the moment, but from the profound sense of responsibility that now weighed on her. She had uncovered something that would change the course of their history, something that no one could ignore. On Velour Prime, the towering crystal spires of the Valorian capital cast long, ominous shadows over the sprawling city. The air hummed with an electric tension, the quiet pulse of the planet's energy vibrating through the ground as though the very planet itself could sense the changing winds of history. Inside the ancient Valorian archives, the soft glow of holographic projections flickered across stone walls, casting ethereal reflections on rows of ancient manuscripts. The sacred knowledge of their civilization lay within these walls, untouched, preserved for millennia. Yet, in the midst of this reverence for the past, a storm was brewing. Professor Nuru, a senior Valorian scholar, stood hunched over a terminal, his fingers trembling slightly as he analyzed the data before him. He had just unlocked a discovery that would shake the very foundation of everything the Valorian Dominion had ever believed. The ancient Valorian script and the long-forgotten Sanskrit were no longer just distant echoes in the galaxy's history. They were connected, inextricably intertwined. The linguistic patterns were undeniable. The symbols on the screen mirrored in a way that transcended space, time, and civilization. The ancient texts, long thought to be unique to the Valorians, revealed a truth that couldn't be hidden any longer. The language, the culture, the very essence of their past was linked to humanity in ways no one had dared to imagine. As the data continued to cascade across his screen, Nuru's breath caught in his throat. This discovery was not just an academic curiosity. It was a revelation that threatened to undo everything the Valorians had built. For centuries, they had held steadfast to the belief that their language, their civilization, stood alone at the top of the galactic hierarchy. But now, the truth was clear. They shared a common origin with the humans. The symbols weren't just ancient relics of a bygone era. They were a message that had been waiting to be discovered, and now it was impossible to ignore. Before Nuru could process the weight of the discovery, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the door, and Director Torin entered the room. His armor gleamed in the low light, his eyes flashing with an unsettling intensity. The air between them thickened, and Nuru could feel the weight of his gaze. the weight of centuries of power and pride. Torin's voice broke the silence, sharp and cutting. "This is treason," he spat, his tone thick with rage. "We cannot let these humans destabilize everything we have built. The Dominion's superiority must remain unquestioned. This discovery, this evidence, it will tear everything apart." The words struck like lightning, filling the room with a cold fury that threatened to suffocate them both. Torin's face was twisted in anger, his scales flickering with flashes of crimson, the embodiment of the Valorian arrogance that had held the galaxy in its grip for millennia. The thought of humans being tied to them in such a profound way was too much for him to bear. The Valorians had always believed they were the pinnacle of civilization, untouched and untouchable, and now that belief was being cracked open by a single, undeniable truth. Torin took a step forward, his fists clenched, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto the data glowing on Nuru's screen. "We cannot allow this truth to reach anyone else," Torin growled, his voice low and dangerous. "The Dominion's power is fragile enough as it is. If this discovery gets out, the galaxy will never be the same. We cannot, we will not, let these humans ruin everything we have worked for." Nuru stood silent, his mind racing. He had always served the Dominion, dedicated to its legacy. But now, faced with the reality of what they had uncovered, he felt a rising sense of conflict. The truth was no longer something that could be controlled. The Valorians had lived under the illusion of superiority for thousands of years, and now that illusion had been shattered. Nuru took a steadying breath, his voice calm, but filled with the weight of what he knew. "We cannot ignore this, Torin," he said, his words firm. "The patterns, they are undeniable. These ancient scripts, they're the same. The Valorians and humanity share a common origin. This cannot be erased." His words hung in the air like a final judgment, a slow realization creeping over him that once the truth was out, nothing would ever be the same again. Torin's expression twisted in fury, his anger palpable as he slammed his fist onto the stone table, sending a ripple of energy through the room. "You would dare to side with them?" Torin's voice was like ice, cold and threatening. "You would betray everything the Dominion stands for. We cannot allow these humans to bring chaos to the galaxy. Their history has no place here." Nuru stood his ground, the flickering light from the terminal casting a ghostly glow over his face. He understood the cost of the truth now, but he also understood that truth had a power that no one, not even the Dominion, could suppress forever. "We must face it, Torin," Nuru said quietly, the weight of his words settling over the room like a cloud of impending storm. "The truth has been uncovered, and there's no turning back now. We are not the only ones who shaped the galaxy. Humanity is part of that story, just as we are." Torin's eyes flashed with an intensity that could burn through the very air between them. The room seemed to close in, the tension crackling with danger. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with cold, unyielding resolve. "Then we will destroy this evidence," he said, his words final and unforgiving. "The Dominion's superiority must remain unquestioned. If it means wiping this discovery from existence, so be it." Nuru swallowed, his hands trembling as the weight of the decision pressed down on him. The truth was a force, one that had been unleashed, and no matter how hard they tried to control it, it would find its way out. But now, the Valorian Dominion stood at the precipice, faced with the ultimate choice: continue to hide behind centuries of lies, or embrace the shared legacy that could forever change their place in the galaxy. As the truth spread throughout the Valorian Dominion, a new reality began to unfurl itself, like an ancient scroll being slowly unwrapped. In the great assembly hall of Velour Prime, Karen Velour, the High Commissioner's daughter, stood at the center, her presence commanding the room. The Valorian elite had gathered in their grand, luminous thrones, their bioluminescent scales glowing in rhythmic pulses, their voices silenced by the revelation that had begun to echo through their ranks. With the weight of centuries of arrogance and pride looming over them, Karen's words cut through the suffocating tension like a blade. "We are not their superiors," she said, her voice filled with unwavering confidence. "We are their cousins. We share the same ancestors. The truth must come out. We were meant to find each other again." Her voice rang clear and strong, each word a defiance to the walls of tradition that had kept the Valorians isolated for millennia. The elite looked at her, stunned, some with disbelief, others with simmering anger. The room felt alive with the surge of emotions, shock, outrage, and fear, as those who had long held power fought with the weight of their own identities crumbling. Some of the older Valorians, their eyes sharp with disdain, rose to challenge her, their neck frills flaring with pride. "This is madness," one shouted, his voice thick with centuries of self-righteousness. "We are superior. How dare you speak of such things?" But Karen did not flinch. She stood tall, her gaze steady, unfazed by the storm of opposition that raged around her. "We have always been bound by the same history," she countered, her voice cutting through their anger. "Our paths have always been intertwined. The question is not whether we are superior, it's whether we are willing to accept the truth that we were never meant to stand apart. We were meant to rise together." Her words struck like a hammer against the fragile walls of Valorian pride. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a subtle shift in the room as some younger Valorians, their scales dimming with doubt, exchanged uncertain glances. The old guard reacted violently, their voices rising in fury, their bodies tense with anger, unwilling to accept what Karen had just laid bare. "This is heresy!" another elder cried, his voice trembling with the force of his rage. "To suggest that we, the Dominion, are in any way linked to those humans." The anger in the room surged, and Karen's words began to meet a wall of resistance so thick it felt like the air itself was closing in. But Karen stood her ground, her eyes fierce, her resolve unshaken. "The truth has already been revealed," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You cannot deny it. The humanity we once considered inferior, they are our equals. And if we continue to resist this truth, we will only set ourselves on a path toward destruction. We cannot be what we were any longer. We must embrace what we are meant to become." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what they were now being asked to confront. For a moment, the room was silent, the air thick with the power of her revelation. And then, a familiar voice, thick with rage, broke through the silence. Director Torin, his form towering over the assembly, his scales burning red with fury, stepped forward. "You speak of truths that will destroy us all," he shouted, his voice shaking with disbelief. "The Dominion's superiority is our strength. If we accept this, if we allow this, everything we have built will fall apart. These humans are nothing more than a passing shadow. We are the ones who have shaped the galaxy, and we will not let that be stolen from us." The room seemed to vibrate with the force of his words, the power of centuries of Valorian pride rattling the foundations of the assembly. His voice carried the weight of the old guard, the entrenched belief that Valorians were the masters of the galaxy. But Karen was undeterred. "You are afraid," she said, her voice cutting through the tumult like a blade of light. "Afraid of what the truth might mean. But the truth is not something we can shun any longer. We cannot keep pretending that we are the only ones who matter, that we are the only ones who have shaped the stars. We must accept what we are. We were never alone. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Each word exchanged, pulling the Valorian elite further apart, some still clinging desperately to the old ways, while others felt the stirrings of something new, something that could change the course of their destiny. Karen's words hung in the air, daring them to choose: cling to the past, or embrace a future that would require them to redefine everything they knew about themselves. As the room swelled with divided voices, the truth was now undeniable, and the fate of the Valorian dominion hung in the balance. Would they fight to maintain their shattered pride, or would they accept the truth that would forever change their place in the galaxy? The question, now louder than ever, seemed to vibrate in the very air itself, and the room stood still, suspended in the space between the past and the future. The Grand Council chamber pulsed with an eerie energy as the Galactic Council assembled once again, their luminous figures filling the vast crystalline hall. The air was thick with anticipation, every delegate on edge, their glowing eyes fixed on the holographic display that hummed at the center of the room. Maya Blackwood, accompanied by Ambassador Chen, stood before the council, her heart pounding as the moment she had worked for had finally arrived. The once unimaginable truth that the Valorians and humans shared a common origin was no longer a whisper in the dark, but a reality that had to be faced. As Maya spoke, her voice filled with quiet triumph, carrying the weight of a revelation that would change the galaxy forever. "This is not just a coincidence," she began, her words steady and powerful. "The ancient Valorians left us a message of unity." The holographic display flickered to life, casting a soft glow across the chamber as ancient symbols from both Valorian script and Sanskrit appeared, floating side by side, their intricate lines pulsing in harmony. As Maya's words echoed, the symbols began to shift, their patterns aligning, merging in a seamless dance that showed the undeniable link between the two species. Each symbol flickered as if alive, telling the story of a connection that had been hidden for millennia. The Valorian script, once thought to be a unique marvel of their civilization, now intertwined with the ancient human language in ways no one had ever expected, revealing a truth that had long been buried. Maya continued, her voice now resonating with certainty. "This isn't just about language. This is about who we are, who we have always been. The truth is that we were always meant to find each other again. Our ancestors left us this message, and now it must be heard." The room was silent, the council's members staring in disbelief as the holographic symbols danced and shifted, the ancient message unfolding before them. What had once seemed like an impossible claim was now undeniable. Humanity and the Valorians shared a common past, a shared inheritance, one that had been buried by time, but never lost. The Valorians, who had once believed themselves to be the pinnacle of galactic civilization, now found themselves confronting a truth that threatened to unravel the very foundation of their empire. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the glow of their scales dimming with the dawning realization that the galaxy's history was not as one-sided as they had always been told. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, the weight of the revelation sinking in. For the first time, the Valorians were being asked to see themselves not as the dominant species, but as part of a larger, interconnected whole. Maya's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of those who had once dismissed humanity as insignificant. The holograms shimmered once more, revealing ancient figures, humans and Valorians working side by side, their cultures blending, building something far greater than either could alone. This was the message left for future generations, a message of unity, of a time when these two species were one. And now, that truth was being revealed again. Maya's voice rang out, calm but filled with the weight of history. The ancient Valorians left us a message, and the message was clear. We were meant to be together. This is not just a coincidence. This is our shared legacy, and it is time to embrace it. The room remained still, the council locked in a moment of profound silence. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no escaping its power. The symbols on the screen glowed brighter, their resonance vibrating through the chamber like an ancient song finally being heard. The galaxy stood on the brink of something new, something born from the union of two species whose destinies were now intertwined. The holographic display flickered, one final image emerging, a vision of a unified galaxy where Valorians and humans worked together, their shared history the foundation of a new age. The council's gaze shifted from the display to Maya, and then to one another, each delegate now faced with a choice: to reject this truth, to cling to the past, or to embrace the future that lay ahead. A future built not on division, but on unity. The room held its breath, suspended in the moment of choice, as the hum of the holograms filled the air. The truth now undeniable. As the tension in this chamber reached its peak, a shift occurred. A subtle, yet undeniable change that rippled through the air like the stir of something ancient awakening. The Valorian guards, who had stood poised with weapons raised in defiance, their presence heavy with the threat of violence, began to lower their arms. It was as if the very act of Maya Blackwood's words, spoken with quiet authority, had pierced through the centuries of pride that had once set them apart. The weight of her declaration hung in the air. When pride falls away and wisdom rises, then our greatest gift will awaken. Her voice, calm yet brimming with an undeniable power, reverberated through the room, resonating with the very fabric of their shared existence. A wave of energy seemed to pass through the room, invisible but palpable, as the Valorians' minds began to stir. The guards, once rigid in their formality, now stood in stillness, their faces flickering with a strange understanding, as if they were feeling something stirring deep within them. And then it happened. The telepathic abilities that had long been dormant, buried under layers of pride, fear, and secrecy, began to awaken. At first, it was a subtle hum, a flicker of awareness, as if the minds of the Valorians were brushing against one another, hesitant, unsure. But then, as though the very walls of the chamber were pulling them together, the telepathic bond deepened. It was as if a door had been opened, and the flood of thoughts, emotions, and memories that had been locked away for so long came rushing in. The Valorian scales began to glow brighter, their once muted lights flickering with newfound energy, the air around them thick with the pulse of their shared consciousness. They could hear each other's thoughts, feel the emotions of those around them. Unity blossomed where there had once been only isolation. The room, once filled with tension, now hummed with a quiet but overwhelming energy, a sensation of connection that had been absent for millennia. Maya's triumph was quiet, but it was there in the soft glow of the moment. The Valorians, once so certain of their superiority, now found themselves linked, not just to each other, but to the humans who had once seemed so far removed from their world. This was the gift Maya had spoken of, the awakening of an ancient ability that transcended the physical and reached into the depths of their shared history. The telepathic bond, once sealed away in the shadows of their past, now filled the room, making the distance between them seem impossibly small. The humans watched in stunned silence understanding that the Valorians were no longer just a distant, superior race. They were now their equals, their partners, united by a past they had long forgotten. And as the energy continued to swell around them, the Valorians stood together, their minds and hearts finally free to embrace the truth that had always been there, waiting to be remembered. The great divide, once thought insurmountable, had been erased, and in its place, a new era had begun. One where unity, understanding, and wisdom would shape the future of both species. The chamber was alive with the hum of shared consciousness, the gift Maya had spoken of now fully awakened, and the truth was no longer something to be feared, but something to be embraced by all. As the first rays of light broke over Valor Prime, the Valorian cities sparkled beneath a shimmering sky, a reflection of the new dawn that had arrived for both Valorians and humans. The quantum displays above pulsed with an ethereal glow, their light cascading in waves, creating an aurora that stretched across the heavens. The once cold, distant sky now seemed alive, vibrant with the promise of what had been accomplished. Colors swirled and intertwined, a visual manifestation of the union between two once separated species, their destinies now bound together in a shared future. Below, the Valorians and humans worked side by side, exchanging knowledge, unlocking the secrets of long-forgotten technologies, and weaving together the fabric of a new era. Maya Blackwood stood alongside Ambassador Chen, both watching as Valorian and human scholars collaborated in harmony, exchanging ideas that had once been thought impossible to merge. The Valorians, who had hoarded their advanced knowledge for centuries, now eagerly shared their secrets. Ancient technologies of quantum mechanics, energy manipulation, and architecture, while humanity brought biotechnology and artificial intelligence into the fold, infusing the once static world with new life and boundless creativity. The Valorian cities, now bustling with energy, were transformed, their once rigid structures now teeming with new life, living buildings, powered by the minds of those who inhabited them. As Valorian bioluminescence blended with human ingenuity, the once stark separation between the two cultures faded, leaving only a unified vision of the future. The landscape was alive with innovation, as both species worked together to uncover and restore ancient Valorian ruins, bringing lost technologies back to the surface and infusing them with new purpose. In the sky above, the quantum displays continued to swirl, casting aurora-like effects that illuminated the heavens in a stunning display of color and light. The energy felt alive, as though the universe itself acknowledged the momentous change unfolding below. The once divided worlds had become one, and the cosmos seemed to hum with the energy of that reunion. Maya, standing at the heart of this transformation, looked up at the vibrant display in the sky, the shimmering auroras reflecting in her eyes. Her voice, soft yet powerful, echoed in the air, the truth of the new era resonating in every word she spoke. Together, we are eternal. Apart, we were remarkable. But now united, we can accomplish the unimaginable. The quantum lights in the sky seemed to pulse in agreement, and for the first time, the world below and the universe above were in perfect harmony. The Valorians and humans had united, and in their union, a future beyond their wildest imaginations began to take shape, where the possibilities were endless, and the barriers that once divided them were now nothing more than distant memories.